Okay, it is 2 o'clock, and I think I'll get started in case anybody is on a time schedule or anything like that. And then you can get off and watch the rest of, see what else is going on at the Fall Fair, which is on my list of things to do. I'm Harriet Hanna, and we used to have a garden center. And you know, in the garden center world, part of advertising is fall is for planting. And you might think that fall is for planting is all about getting you in the garden center to buy plants, but I'm here to tell you that fall actually is for planting, that it's not just an advertising slogan. So why? Why would we plant in the fall? Let me just go to my first slide. Well, first off, it relieves some of the pressure of what you have to do in the spring. We're all really busy in the spring, so why not do what you can in the fall to make it a little easier for you in the spring? So, you know, that's kind of a no-brainer. But then, here comes a really interesting part. Our growing conditions in fall are much more conducive to planting than they are in the spring. And here we are thinking that spring is the only time to plant because that's the traditional time we've been doing it. And it's a well-known fact that a lot of people have absolutely fabulous spring gardens because it's the only time they get to the garden center. What you really need to do is go regularly through the whole season, not only to see what looks good at any one time, but what's available, because not everything is available first thing in the spring. There are a lot of things that basically look like dead sticks or pots with nothing first thing in the spring. So they're not very attractive and you're not going to buy them. Later on in the season, they're absolutely fabulous. So yes, that's why you need to go again. But the thing is, our soil temperature now is warm. What is it in the spring? Guess what? Still very cold. And a lot of us, you know, our lawns get dry or something like that, and we're out there watering the lawn, which, guess what? Makes the soil even colder. So don't be in a big hurry to water your lawns in the spring, and don't be in a big hurry to water your garden in the spring because it's going to make things colder. Now, let's get back to planting now, because our soils now are warm. And the thing about warm soil is that roots settle in faster when the soil is warm. Nighttime temperatures and daytime temperatures, except for maybe today, are cooler as well. And that means that there isn't the pressure on the plant to perform the way that there is in the spring. In the spring, you know, the plant, we want the roots to grow, we want the top to grow, we're in a big hurry, we throw fertilizer at it, we throw water at it, and the poor plant is giving, you know, saying, give me a second, let me catch up. This time of year, the plant just kind of settles in and goes, it's nice out. Guess what? There aren't even as many bugs this time of year. And the diseases have more or less gone the way of summertime. Most of them are past. So the insect and disease pressures are much less at this time of year. So we've got cooler nighttime temperatures, cooler daytime usually, and warm soil, and the bugs aren't as prevalent, and the other thing is that we can usually rely on some rain in the fall. In the spring, if we get rain, it tends to warm the soil a little bit, but you know, it can be really awful to get rain in the spring because it just cools everything down, makes everything wet and mucky. This time of year, we're quite happy to get some rain, especially in a year like this. So now that you know that there are reasons why it's a good time to go and do some planting, here's another thing that's really interesting. In the summertime, when the soil is really warm, plants shut down. If you've ever tried growing anything in a container and the pot gets really hot, you know that the plant just sort of goes, yeah, it's too hot out here. I'm not doing anything anymore. And along comes fall, and the soil it has cooled down a little bit. There's a little bit more water. The temperatures are better, and they perk up. So this is true. 80% of a plant's root is in late summer and early fall. We tend to think of all those roots growing in the spring, but they're just trying to hang on because the soil's so cold. So this time of year, everything is ready for them to get going. The only thing that we have to worry about is that winter is breathing down fall's neck. So we have that to think about, because colder temperatures are coming. But right now, things are really good. Now, another thing we can do is take advantage of price markdowns. This time of year, garden centers don't want to have things overwintering, so you can get some really good deals. And it's a great time to go out there and see what looks good. Things you might never have considered, things that have absolutely fabulous fall color that you might never have considered, or berries, or stems that look really good. Plants may be in full leaf right now and still look fabulous, and so you can get a good idea of what they're going to look like in your garden throughout the season. But you might never have looked at that plant in the spring because it didn't look like a whole lot of anything. So the other thing to keep in mind is that when you plant in the fall, you more or less gain an entire season. So let's talk a little bit more about that. When you are planting in the fall, the soil is warm, so the roots start growing really quickly. As long as the soil is not frozen, those roots continue to grow. So they're growing in the winter. If we, unlike last year where we had a real nasty winter, if we get a mild winter, then those roots might continue to grow through the whole season. But as long as it's only frozen on the top and the roots are not frozen, those roots will continue to grow. So by next spring, that plant is well rooted and it's ready to take off, meaning that when we get into the heat of next summer, it's much better able to withstand the heat and the drought situations that seem to be what we're getting used to this, every year after year after year. So there are so many pluses to planting in the fall. Keep that in mind, because right now is a really good time. Late August, early September till the middle of September is your prime time for planting. So the key to good plant establishment in the fall is soil temperature that's 12 to 15 degrees Celsius for at least 2 to 3 weeks after planting. 5 weeks is even better. So you can see why early planting is going to be better than leaving it until late September or into October. So doing it in early September is going to give you better root development. Better root development means that you're going to have a more established plant next year. Now, determining which plant to go with can be a little bit difficult. Plant condition is important. Those buds that are at the end of each stem on a shrub, when they first develop in the spring with the new growth, they're weak, they're limp, they're very succulent, but as the season progresses, they lignify, which means they get woody. And when you do that, you can see that at the end of the stem, that new bud is actually quite woody. It's no longer really wimpy. And when you're at that stage, the plant is actually ready for winter. It may still have leaves, but it is actually ready for winter. So it's a good candidate for fall planting because it's not going to put on any growth this year that is then going to be too tender to make it through the winter. So going with plants that are already hardened off for the winter are good choices. Anything that is container grown is a good choice. You can plant them just about any time, but earlier is good because the roots are self-contained, so you don't have to worry about damaging the roots in any way, and they are self-contained and they can get settled in very quickly. Perennials are really good plants to put into a fall garden. Many perennials are available. A lot of perennials that are available this time of year, I'm sure you never looked at in the spring because all they are is green plants, if they're doing anything. But this is the time of year when they start to come into their own. Asters and the hardy fall mums, not the ones that you see at the grocery stores and everywhere else, because those are basically just grown to be planted and tossed. What you want is something that's going to be hardy enough to come back year after year. And this is also the time of year when you get many perennials that you don't pay much attention to the rest of the year. The echinaceas and the rudbeckias are coming into their own. That would be the the coneflowers and the brown-eyed Susans. The coneflowers, I'm getting a little bit skeptical about them. The ones that have been around for a long time, the ones that are seed grown as opposed to cutting grown, they still seem to be pretty, they have a good record in terms of coming back year after year. The ones that have the fancy colors, the bright oranges, the corals and that sort of thing, they have such a mixed history in terms of their breeding that a lot of them aren't very hardy. And they don't come into bloom until the fall, so you don't find them in the garden centers until late summer and fall, and of course you plant them, because traditionally echinacea has been hardy to zone 3. That's good. These new ones, the hardiness rating still says zone 3, they don't make it through the first winter. So, you know, like I said, getting pretty skeptical of them. I'm of the opinion that if you want to grow echinaceas, you get them as early as you can in the season, get them in the ground, use every strategy that you can that's available to you to get them through the winter, which includes mulching them the first year. And I'll be talking about a few other strategies you can use as well. So broadleaf to evergreens like rhododendrons, hollies, and see what else have we got. Oregon grape. Transplanting them this time of year can be a little iffy. So the handout has information on what transplants well and what doesn't. So rather than going into all of that right now and giving you information that's going to go right over your head, then I'll give it to you so that you can take it home and you've got something that you can refer to when you go to the garden center, knowing that hollies, no, not such a good thing to be planting this time of year. Rhododendrons, not so much either. Ornamental grasses. There are basically two groups of ornamental grasses. There are the ones that are called the cool season grasses, which start growing really early in the spring. They're up, they're growing, they put their seed heads on by summer, and they're finished by midsummer. Those ones you can divide and transplant now without any problem whatsoever. The ones that are the warm season grasses, which come into their own later in the season, you know, you're out there looking at them in the spring and you're going, are they ever going to do anything? They finally start growing late spring into the summer. They're looking better. In the fall, they look fabulous because that's the point they put up their inflorescences. This is when you see the really striking fall grasses. They are better. You can transplant them if you buy them in a container. But if you're going to move them and you've already got them in your garden, you can take them from one spot to another, have your hole ready so they don't even know they've been moved, but don't divide them this time of year. They're better divided in the spring. Okay? That's also in your handout. So amongst the other things that you can, the sorts of things that you can plant in the fall are hardy annuals. So of course anything that is going to give us color in our gardens for longer is great. I'm of the opinion that summer is way too short and winter is way too long around here. I'm not a skier, so you know I don't have that particular appeal. What I have is holidays in Mexico. So I'll go with that any day over skiing. So anyway, what you want is stuff that's going to make your garden look good for as long as possible. Gardening does not end with September 1st and the kids going back to school. Gardening goes until, at least in my opinion, until the snow is falling. And then in the winter, what you want is you want plants that have really nice twig color, that have berries that carry on in the fall, that have hips like rose hips that hold on in the fall. You know, and you want evergreens that will also give you color through the winter. So winter has to be a good color season too. So I'm also a garden designer. When I design gardens, I start with winter, so that I have stuff that looks good in the winter because, you know, like I said before, any fool can have a spring garden. It's challenging to get it through the rest of the year. So if you start with winter when most people aren't even thinking about having color, and then work your way back to spring, you're going to have a garden that is fabulous through the entire season and will be interesting through the entire season. So one of those interests is bulbs that bloom in the spring. And that means that this is the time of year when you need to buy them because you can't get them in the spring or very rarely, and they cost a lot if you're going to get them there. So go looking for fall bulbs. They're called fall bulbs because they're planted now, but they bloom in the spring. That's going to start off your gardening season next year. So get those. If there's any container stock that is on sale that you want to take advantage of, get that. Garlic. This is the time to be planting garlic, or soon will be. First day of fall is sort of the traditional, but a lot of people plant Thanksgiving weekend, that sort of thing too. Lawns. If you have to refresh your lawn or redo it, or you're thinking about overseeding, this is the perfect time. Remember, soil's warm. There's more reliable moisture. So when you're planting anything, think about at least 1 inch of rain every week. If you can't give them that, make sure they get 1 inch of water every week. So thankfully, sprinkling restrictions have eased a little bit, because this is important. When we get to, and what happens in the fall is that the irrigation guys and landscapers are really hot to trot to get the lines blown out. And lots of times fall is not nearly over and they've already blown out the lines. So make sure that you're still watering any of your new plantings so that they go into winter with a lot of water in their tissues. So fall planting mulching. Now this is important. I told you about mulching echinaceas. Mulching trees is also important, but a lot of people do it the wrong way. In this diagram on this side, you'll see how it's done incorrectly, where somebody has made a mulch volcano around the stem of the plant. That's how you don't do it. What you want to do is you make the volcano, but you make sure that there's the hole in the middle, okay? So what you want to do is keep the stem, whether it's a tree or perennials or anything else that you planted, away from the mulch so that you don't get rotting and extra moisture being held in there. When it comes into winter time and you don't put on mulch for winter at this time of the year, you put it on after we've already had frost and we've got about 1 inch of frost in the ground. The reason that you're doing this is you want to stabilize your plants so that the ground stays steadily cold at that point. Underneath it's still going to be warm, but the top is going to be steadily cold. And at that point you're unlikely to have voles move in. I don't know about you, but the voles and the pocket gophers are the bane of my garden. I have fields on both sides of my garden, and they love my garden. Absolutely love it. I lost a lot of plants last winter, and that is tough to deal with. So anyway, it says your battery is running low. Okay. Looks like it wants to go any further. Okay, let's see what else I was going to talk about. So you've got your handout with the information of what to plant and what not to plant. So what I'm going to go over just right now is to ensure success. There are a few things that you can do. Some I've talked about, but what I haven't is about using some strategies to get your plants through. One is to plant as early as possible. If that can't be done, when you get close to winter, use wilt-proof. If you haven't used wilt-proof, it's a wax coating. For you women, it's like a moisturizer. It protects the skin of the plant from drying out. So we get some pretty nasty winds here in the fall and in the winter. When that's combined with cold weather, it can very quickly dry out a plant. So the wilt-proof provides that barrier so that the plant doesn't dry out as quickly. Really important for things like Japanese maples and broadleaf evergreens like rhododendrons. Even if you haven't transplanted them now, if you've got them in your garden, be sure to use it on them because it'll give them that extra edge of protection from winter damage. There are a few things. The other thing that in terms of some strategies to use, when you're planting, I know earlier there was a question about bone meal, and I have a somewhat different opinion on bone meal. Bone meal is an important source of phosphorus, but it's often recommended as something that you put in with your plant when you pot it in order for the roots to quickly establish. But bone meal, in order to be used by a plant, has to be broken down by soil microorganisms to put it into a form that the plant can even use. plain bone meal the plant can't access. So what the bacteria need is warm soil. So in the fall, we do have warm soil, but it still takes time for the bacteria to do their thing. In the spring, I'm of the opinion that bone meal is a total waste of time and money. This time of year, you can use it with planting your bulbs and that sort of thing, but I would still prefer something that acts more quickly. And I prefer a transplanter fertilizer, which has a 5-15-5 formulation, so it's high in the phosphorus, but it's available to the plant immediate, unlike bone meal, which, as I said, has to be broken down by soil microorganisms before it's available to the plant. Now that came as a big shock to me a number of years ago, and I was reading The Garden Professors, and I have met Linda Scott, who is behind all of that. Some really interesting stuff on there, and I found out things that went in the face of what I had been taught, and that was one of them. So, bone meal, okay, over the long run, because it will work in late summer when soil bacteria can break it down. But in terms of actually making the plants settle in quickly, no, not so much. So then your transplanter fertilizer is going to be a much better choice. Water plants in well when you plant them, and especially right before winter. Fertilize with a low nitrogen fertilizer if you are at all. Again, this is another reason why I like the transplanter fertilizer, and use wilt proof. So those are my strategies. And take a look at the list of plants that do and do not transplant well. One thing that I forgot to mention is plants that are in peat pots that are cuttings, like plants that are really shallow rooted, like thyme and other ground covers, because they need really liberal mulching to get through the winter. Because heaving of the roots, especially in the spring with the alternate freezing and thawing, is a big problem in this area. So they heave out of the soil easily, so you have to mulch them really deeply to get them through the winter. Better choice would probably be to wait until next spring. Okay, I think that covers it. And all I can say is have fun shopping and have fun planting. Thank you. For which? I would go with white paint in that, or use a stem wrap, because it's generally going to be the biggest problem on the trunk where you have a wider area. It's called southwest injury because that is where the sun is the strongest and longest during the winter. So wilt proof is not going to do enough. What you need is something that is going to reflect the sunlight off. So white paint or the tree wrap would be the way to go. Yes?
When's a good time to transplant an apple tree?
If it's bare root, you can do it now or late into the fall. If it's container grown, you can do it now or into the fall. If you're moving it from one spot to another, what I would suggest you do rather than moving it now would be to take your shovel about a foot out from the trunk. How big is this tree? Like so?
Maybe an inch trunk diameter.
Yeah, maybe 18 inches then. Okay, take your shovel, plunge it in all the way around to completely cut off all the roots 18 inches out, so that you are then, remember this is the time of greatest root growth. What you're going to do is you're going to encourage a lot more root growth within that 18 inches, and then next spring you can transplant it and you'll have a good bunch of the roots right there. Okay, does that make sense?
You wouldn't move it this time of year.
I don't think so, because right now, right now I think it's going to put it under too much stress. Okay?
And if it's smaller,
Like that, absolutely move it. Just make sure you give it lots of water. Okay. Yeah. Anybody else have a question? Okay, well then I'm sure there's somebody else waiting to go on, and thank you very much.